Welcome, fans of the fiendish. It's time to explore the darkest corners of my cinematic crypt here at Movie Fright Fair, seeking out tidbits of terrorific trivia from every eerie era. Let's call up my legendary Weird Wheel. Now, let's learn which dread-packed decade we will pour over today. Ah, the scaresome 60s. Now that is a groovy time for ghoulie movies. In fact, I think this will be the perfect time to introduce you to the black sheep of the family, my family, none other than Groovy Irv himself. But in order to coax Groovy Irv out from the sunshine and the flowers into the glorious gloom of my way cool crypt, we'll have to give him a taste of one of our very special brownies. Interesting. Weird. Hey, namaste, Fright fans. Groovy Irv here, taking over from my estranged, or for that matter, just plain strange older bro, Ghoulie Irv. I'm here to fill you in on my favorite decade in horror, the way out 60s. It was a time of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and oodles of scary movies. Movies that freaked me out. Movies that really screwed around with my brain, whatever is left of it. And Hitchcock was sure a big deal in the 60s, starting out the decade with a shocker that's a real scream. 1960 Psycho stars Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates, the ultimate mama's boy, who forced the world into thinking twice when they took a shower. And speaking of that shower steam, did you know that Bosco chocolate syrup was used for blood? One of my favorites. Or that Anthony Perkins was rehearsing for a play in New York when Hitch actually rolled the cameras in California? Or that the director originally wanted the shower sequence to be totally silent. Totally. But Bernard Herrmann composed music for it anyway and won Hitchcock over with his work. Way to go, Bernie! Also, from Alfred's creepy canon in this era is The Birds, a movie well worth taking a peek at over and over. For this shockifying survey of our fine feathery friends gone amok, Hitch introduced the world to his newest blonde, Tippi Hedren. She was called Hitchcock's next Grace Kelly by some magazines. But Tippi got tipsy from some of the shenanigans the master of suspense put her through in the film. Her face was actually pecked by birds in one scene. And the film's climactic sequence took 7 days to shoot. And it was so grueling for Tippi that she couldn't even work for a week afterwards. Of course, there was more to the psychedelic 60s than Hitchcock's great shockers. Consider the work of Roger Corman, the maestro of pinching pennies and pleasing audiences. Along with Vincent Price, Corman put out a slew of great adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe's stories, including The Pit and the Pendulum, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Mask of the Red Death, and The Tomb of Ligeia. Each movie was shot quickly, but each movie also looked great and featured deliciously evil performances by the great Vincent Price. And speaking of cheap, The Pendulum was made of wood with a rubber blade, while a fire sequence in the House of Usher was actually Corman burning a barn that he used time and time again on future films. Of course, Hitchcock and Corman were not the only horror names to drop out of the 60s. Great Britain's Hammer Studios really came into its groovy own during the age as well. While Christopher Lee's Dracula was introduced in the preceding decade, the bloodsucker continued his count of victims throughout the 60s in such films as Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. Prince of Darkness should have been called Prince of Silence because Drac didn't even talk. Why? Because Mr. Lee thought the dialogue was decidedly uncool. And did you know that 1968's Dracula Has Risen from the Grave was handed the first rating from the Motion Picture Association of America? And guess what? It got a G. Hard to believe with all those stakes piercing flesh, blood sucking, and sexy Veronica Carlson in revealing outfits. There are so many other trippy terror tales from the 60s. I'd like to hang with you cats some more and tell you about them, but the sands of time are fading quickly away.